afternoon. I am Justin Hinckley, and I am the regional editor of Bridge, Michigan. And we're here today to talk about the young marijuana industry in Michigan, which appears to be in a state of flux at the moment. There's a proliferation of stores that are driving prices down, the new wholesale tax currently tied up in court, and a push in the legislature to limit the number of marijuana businesses any one community can have. So we here at Bridge thought this would be a good time to check in with some experts in the field to talk about how marijuana has changed Michigan, where things stand today, and what could be in store. With us today are Nathan Joyle, an assistant professor at Northern Michigan University, Jamie Zerby of Smart Approaches to Marijuana, Jamie Lowell, an advocate who helped write the ballot proposal that legalized marijuana in Michigan. So let's get started. Panelists, I'll just ask you to keep things on track by keeping your answers down to a minute or two. We want to hear from all of you and make sure that we get out of here on time. And to start with, voters in 2018 legalized marijuana by a strong 56% to 44% margin. And the drug has, in a lot of ways, been normalized since then. In my town, there's a local cannabis retailer who sometimes shows up in town parades, which would have been unthinkable just a decade ago. Yet many residents across the state still think that voters made the wrong choice, or at least that there's too many marijuana retailers in town. Voters in two towns just limited marijuana stores within their borders. So my first question is, do you think marijuana will continue to be normalized, or are we starting to see signs of buyer's remorse? And Nathan, I want to start with you on this one.
Sure thing. I think it's important to acknowledge that while 56 to 44% is a landslide in the context of American politics, in practice, this means that about 4 out of 10 people were unhappy with the decision. And I think when you think about it like that, it's totally expected that some people will perhaps complain about any aspect of the industry that they see because they wish that the whole thing did not exist. But polling shows at the national level, Gallup polling in 2023 and 2025 both showed that 64% of Americans support legalization. And Fox News, of all places, actually found in May of 2024 that 69% of American voters support legalization, including a majority of both Republicans and Democrats. At the state level, recent polling in 2024 found that, in line with national polls, 64% of likely voters in Michigan support legalization. So I think that if we were to vote again today, we are it's reasonable to expect that we would see broader support for legalization. And personally, I think that what we're seeing today are reasonable attempts to regulate the most extreme aspects of the industry, where there's a large number of stores in border towns, for example. And I don't think that these reasonable attempts at regulation represent a sea change or a turning of the tables in any way. I think there's no putting the cat back in the bag on this one. Marijuana is here to stay.
All right. Jamie Zerby.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for having me. Just for anybody who doesn't know, Smart Approaches to Marijuana is the organization where I serve as the chief of staff. We are a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization, and we are explicitly anti-legalization. So you're going to hear anti-legalization things from me here today. I think I'm a little outnumbered, but I'm honored to serve the cause because really what we deal with a lot of parents and families who have lost children as a consequence to marijuana use, just marijuana use. And, voters in states are told that the state will tax and regulate, therefore marijuana is going to be safer. The illegal market, the illicit market is going to go away. The industry will create revenue, but none of that has matriculated really in any state. That has not amounted to the promises that were made have certainly not been kept. And it's really no wonder, because how can a state effectively regulate an industry that is so large, powerful? And, as soon as legalization is enacted in a state, the industry fights very hard against what we would consider sensible regulations, things like advertising restrictions, potency caps, zoning rules and laws. And, the natural people are really seeing the natural consequences of more drugs in their communities. And that includes more dangerous roadways, higher rates of use, dependence, more accidental poisonings of young children. All of these things are going on. And so I think people really are wising up, because those consequences have a fiscal impact on the state, but they also have a real life impact. There's, some of the people that we've worked with in Michigan, specifically parents of Michiganders, Cindy Gresham, whose only child, Haley, died by suicide while in withdrawal from marijuana, Gordon McDougal, whose son, Henry, died while driving after dabbing. El Guidabono, who lost her 30-year marriage as a consequence of her husband's marijuana use. So the parents and family members that we work with, many of them voted for this because they thought that it would be no big deal. Maybe many of them even consumed weed 30 years ago, but it's a very different drug today. Commercialization has really driven that. And I think that people are wising up. Just like with tobacco, it took decades of public health awareness, people seeing the consequences of their parents and grandparents. And I think the tide is turning. We have polling that shows that the tide is really turning.
All right. Thank you very much. Jamie Lowell.
Well, I think cannabis is going to continue to be normalized in Michigan. When the voters passed the MRTMA in 2018, it was a clear choice for a regulated legal system, rather than keeping prohibition in place. Uh, Cannabis is in the mainstream. There's licensed storefronts. I think people see more of the jobs and the tax revenue and the less arrests and those kind of positive outcomes than they are thinking in terms of buyer's remorse. Some local places, have made different decisions, but that's how our cannabis system works. Is it's a local option, and so there's going to be some adjustments on a local level, but there is no, state level issue or concerns about, what people voted for in 2018.
Okay, thank you. Next question is, while many Michiganders enjoy the freedom to purchase cannabis products in their communities, and many town councils enjoy the tax revenue flowing in, some residents have told me that marijuana retailers create an image of their towns that they don't want to see. How do you think legalized cannabis has changed Michigan and its communities? And Jamie Zerby, will start with you this time.
Sure. Well, like I said, we work with parents every single day who have lost children as a consequence to legal marijuana use. Um, I think when it comes to the tax and regulate issue, that's an issue that I personally get caught up on a lot, because the tax income is not a dollar for dollar income. It's not that the state takes in money and then the state then uses that money to fund something good. There's real cost associated with this. I'm come from a long line of small business owners. My husband and I own a small business, so I know that money is fungible, but money also is not always a dollar for dollar. And the industry really does use the profits that they make to advocate against those common sense regulations. The There was a study done in 2021, or an analysis, I'm sorry, that said that up to 70% of marijuana in Michigan was still purchased illegally. So, that's in 2021. Maybe there's different numbers recently, but this is a pattern that we've seen in other states, that the resources that are required to regulate this industry and clean up the mess that more drugs and communities make is actually not something that is actually outweighs the tax income benefits. And no state has really done this very well. Michigan is, not an exception to the rule here. Everyone has really failed to regulate this industry effectively so that the tax burden or the tax benefit is a meaningful benefit and doesn't end up being a burden.
Thank you very much. I want to know, it looks like we have joining us Al Williams, who is president of the Detroit Cannabis Industry Association and president of Secure Can 2. And he's going to join us in answering these questions. Al, you may have missed it. The current question is, how do you think legalized cannabis has changed Michigan and its communities? And since you're joining us, why don't we start with you, or move to you, excuse me.
Um, uh, I think cannabis impact on Michigan. Hello, everybody. How you doing? I tried to get on earlier. It took me a second through Eventbrite, but it's good to see everybody. I want to say hello from Detroit Cannabis Industry Association, and I think that legalizing cannabis has reshaped Michigan in so many different ways. Just like the casinos has reshaped our riverfronts, it's mainstreamed something that used to live in the shadows. And it's forced every community to sort of decide, how we brand this thing together. And I think the upside is the economic engine. I know we provide a number of jobs, as you can see in the city of Detroit. The city of Detroit government loves revenue sharing, and it's changed in that aspect. But at the same time, for we're finally in the black when it comes to income taxes here in the city of Detroit. And part of the reason why that's happening is because of all of the jobs that the cannabis industry is providing in the city of Detroit. It's storefront investments. It's changing the city and the way it looks. I know in my building in the city of Detroit specifically, and in Flint, in our business in Flint, both of those buildings were vacant, dilapidated, old automotive mechanic shops that we have turned into vibrant businesses that also invest in the community. And of course, it's also pushed consumer behavior into, more of a regulated lane instead of being in the black market. So now you got testing products, age gates, and fewer street corner dynamics. And so I think it's changed specifically a whole lot, in this city and around the state. The cannabis industry is out in the open now. It's not on just in the black market, although it's still a very vibrant black market, unfortunately. And so, I think it's done a phenomenal job. Our industry has done a phenomenal job of just changing the whole idea of looking at cannabis as an illegal substance and more of a true, vibrant business. That's the first and foremost, the most important thing I truly believe in this state.
Thank you. Jamie Lowell, how do you think legalized cannabis has changed Michigan and its communities?
Well, legalization has certainly made cannabis more visible, and each of the communities that have opted in, and by the way, there's only been like 400 of them out of the 1,700 uh, you know, possible localities where they could opt in. But when that happens, that gets experienced, differently. Uh, but for sure, those places, it means jobs, it means new investment. Those places are getting tens of thousands of dollars per retail license that they allow there. And they use that money for road repair, police fire support, stabilize budgets. Um, and then they have to adjust, per the community response and, per what goes on. But uh, it's all been positive from my perspective.
Thank you. Nathan, how do you think legalized cannabis has changed communities?
Well, referring back to the statement in the question about the image of a town, I sort of wonder how do we define that? It sounds extremely subjective to me. And personally, as an academic, I'm more of a hard numbers kind of person. I did a little bit of research ahead of this, because I have my own suspicions. But again, I want to talk about numbers. Regional Science Urban Economics published in 2019 that crime in neighborhoods where cannabis dispensaries exist was found to decrease by as much as 19%. The journal Police Quarterly similarly found in 2018 that marijuana legalization broadly corresponds to a decrease in violent and property crimes in the area. The Journal of Economic Behavior and Organization found in 2019 that the areas where marijuana was legalized saw a reduction in rape, violent crime, and property crime when compared to neighboring counties which did not legalize marijuana. There are many similar reports. I could talk about them all day, honestly, but in general, we're finding that legalizing marijuana reduces funding for and thus the presence of violent criminals like street gangs. And additionally, removing marijuana criminals from the criminal justice system frees up police and court resources, which has proven to lead to better enforcement for violent crime reports in district with legalized marijuana. We find the police use these additional resources to address more immediate threats to public safety, actually. And so when talking about marijuana industry giving towns a bad image in some way, I believe wholeheartedly this is a problem with optics that arises from limited reporting of legitimate statistics combined with the distribution of agenda-based misinformation, because the numbers show that legalizing marijuana actually makes towns safer.
Thank you. Next question is, Michigan has more than 850 cannabis retailers. They're spread out across 75 of the state's 83 counties. Niles Township, down in southwest Michigan, voters there just prohibited marijuana businesses there, but the town council had approved 21 licenses in a town of about 14,000 people. There's a town south of me here in Alpena that has, I think, one stoplight and four dispensaries. So my question is, does Michigan have too many stores, and why or why not? And Jamie Lowell, will start with you this time.
Well, no, I just mentioned the last question that this isn't really by county. Counties cannot opt in or opt out. This is by each city or township or village that makes that decision. And of the 1,700 plus or so, I don't have the exact numbers, but like somewhere only around like 400 or some of those have opted in. So some areas clearly have like a high concentration of retailers, and that obviously makes it more noticeable and for some people, and it may seem like there's too many stores, but um, that's a matter of how many stores are supported in a particular area, and when they're not spread out as they could potentially be, and hopefully will be in the future, then you have to deal with like the image of those particular areas and not taking into consideration the vast expanses that really don't have those types of things going on. But local governments, if those things become an issue, they have the ability to manage those numbers through zoning and licensing and in some communities, as you mentioned, recently chose not to go there. That's how our system works. And I think that's all okay. But there's some work to be done to help spread this out. I think that would help out a lot.
Al, do you think Michigan has too many stores?
That question to me?
Yes.
No, I don't. I think the bottom line is the too many argument in this state, has created an environment where, unfortunately, you have smaller cities that maybe have higher density, but I don't think that we have too many stores. I think the competition is there. The public sector is already monetizing the footprint, and I think that local control has has put a lot of pressure on communities that can opt in or out. And of course, they're capping the licenses themselves. So in my Niles Township, for instance, voters that supported it, are feel like that, people are coming in from not only other parts of the state but other states, and so they're seeing it's a high density of cannabis stores. Same thing in Monroe. Um, and so, but they're experiencing what they're experiencing also adds to the value of that city. I mean, the vacant buildings that have been taken over and are now vibrant businesses. The revenue sharing that they receive is very important. And so Michigan's issue is not too many stores. It's more of the density misalignment, I believe. For consumers, the because of the competition, the prices are dropping drastically, so they're happy. For operators, of course, for me, it also drops our 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 margins, and it makes it harder to operate. But if you really in Michigan, we don't need fewer stores. What we need is smarter caps, better spacing opportunities in these hot areas, these what they're calling, what are these the places like Niles and Monroe, in these areas where the clusters are getting tighter and tighter. We just need, better spacing, zoning for those cities. If you understand what I'm saying. And so I think that Michigan can take on more stores. I really do believe that. I think the people who are advocating for caps on the stores are really trying to make their own business more profitable. When it comes to dispensaries. But I think that we are a very, very high market valued state. There are some people that are getting out only because they're not making the margins are scaring them, and so they're closing shop and getting out, unfortunately. But I think that we still have room to grow here. And we're not operating in every county. We're not operating in every city. And those cities that do have dispensaries just need to do a better job at their zoning. Stop putting them all in one location or in one storefront, or not one storefront, but one mini mall. If you go down to Monroe, for instance, you go to in one parking lot of one mini mall, it's like 4 or 5 dispensaries just in the same parking lot, basically. Same thing with some other places. And if you go to Benton Harbor, they're all in their downtown area. Every single dispensary is less than a block from each other. And so I just think that we can do a better job. Our city leaders, municipal leaders can do a better job spacing the dispensaries out to where they have more, where the zoning is really more reflective of the population, and it will allow for more stores, and I think people will be happier.
Nathan, what do you think? Are there too many stores in the state?
Well, I think we need to define what we mean by too many. If you mean too many in some moral sense, I know that in my town, as probably in your town, we sell alcohol in every grocery store, most restaurants, and we even have a number of bars which only exist to sell alcohol. In fact, in Marquette, we have more bars than dispensaries, and I think that's not uncommon today in the state still. So in that sense, I don't think it's too many in any moral way. However, if you mean too many, as in the market won't bear the cost of operation and employment at so many stores, I do think that's true in particular, as we've been saying in some high density areas. And I think that regardless of whether municipalities limit this phenomenon or not, we're seeing it organically come to a head. In Marquette County, where I reside, for example, we had 18 months ago at least 21 dispensaries operating, and we are now down to 13 last time I counted. And in just the past 6 months, 1/3 of the dispensaries inside Marquette city limits have closed their doors. And this wasn't due to any kind of regulation or any kind of pressure from the city or the population. It's a natural and self-limiting phenomenon grounded thoroughly in simple supply and demand economics. And I do believe that we're approaching a point of stability soon where we have perhaps around half of the peak number of dispensaries operating in most areas.
And Jamie Zerby, what are your thoughts?
Well, in a true surprise to no one, I would argue that one store is too many. Because, we have to look at what, we several people have mentioned where these stores are concentrated. And I think when we look at the data, we see that the stores tend to be concentrated in Black and Brown communities, in minority communities, in communities that are maybe lower income, and communities that have lower, less access to resources to deal with the consequences of more drug use in their communities. And so we really have to think about that. Think about who this industry is targeting. I'm not saying individuals here on this call. I'm saying the industry here as a whole. Who does the industry target? They tend to target people who are the most vulnerable. They target people who have fewer resources. They target people like pregnant women that are looking just for solutions. So I would argue again that one is too many. And so with the close link between marijuana use and heart disease, psychosis, diabetes, 850 is way too many. Um, yeah.
Thank you. Al, I see you got your hand up. Can you quickly?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think if just taking Niles Township, for instance, they approved originally 21 um, dispensaries or marijuana sales applications along a 1.5 mile stretch, calling it the Green Mile. That's what we call it, which is, too high in density. And we're not targeting pregnant women. We're not targeting younger people. We started off targeting people with medical licenses, and that's still the base of our company. We treat our medical licensees, whoever they are, white, black, brown, red, yellow, male or female, fat or skinny, does not matter. They got a license, and that's who we targeted. And so I think that at the end of the day, like I said, places like Niles Township, and those cities who are getting into this just need to be more careful with their zoning and spacing these dispensaries out. And no, we're not. There isn't an over density of dispensaries. I just think we're putting them in too many in one place, too many of them in one place, and we can do a better job.
Thank you. All right, moving on. There's a lot going on with cannabis in Michigan at the moment. Legislature has imposed a 24% wholesale tax, which is currently tied up in court. And there has been a proposed limit on the number of stores that can open in each community. Continually low prices have prompted at least one major chain of retailers to exit the state. So my question is, how would you describe the state of the marijuana industry in Michigan right now? And Al, you're up first this time. Did we lose Al? All right, we'll move on. We'll move on. Nathan, how about you? how would you describe the current state of the marijuana industry in Michigan?
Sure, I absolutely. This was maybe my favorite question today. I think it's important to understand actually where the competition and the prices are coming from. Vertical integration, by which you mean large companies operating at multiple levels of a market ecosystem. For example, the way that Walmart makes and sells great value brand products, which they own. Vertical integration is huge in the cannabis industry right now. And increasingly, the industry is dominated by large, vertically integrated corporations that own farms, processing centers, and retail stores. TerraSend, the large retailer that I believe we're talking about, that left recently, was actually a large farmer first and foremost. They were a vertically integrated cannabis company, and so they owned stores to sell their own material. But they actually owned licenses to grow 14,000 cannabis plants. And for reference, there are only around 88,000 remaining cannabis plants licensed in the state today, according to estimates by license type. So we have to acknowledge that the market TerraSend was actually pulling out of was growing cannabis in Michigan. The fact that they pulled out of selling it was a natural consequence of the fact they no longer had any to sell. It's perhaps popular to talk about the retailers and confuse the story as existing in that space because we all see the retailers. They're highly visible. But so much of what goes on at the retail level is actually a direct result of what goes on at the farming level. If there's too many retailers, it's largely because there's too many corporations farming. If there's too much competition, and we do know that prices are at rock bottom right now, it's largely from too much competition at the farming level driving those wholesale prices down. Right now in Michigan, it's extremely hard to grow cannabis profitably, and consolidation is the name of the game. Larger companies can afford to ride out the bottom of the barrel wholesale prices and slowly buy up their competitors. TerraSend decided that the attrition to win that fight was too expensive, and so they left. And I think that that decision, when properly understood, is very representative of the type and level of consolidation we're seeing in the industry right now.
All right. Al, coming back to you, how would you describe the current state of the industry in Michigan?
Man, we are the commercial cannabis industry in Michigan is facing so many challenges from both the federal level and the state level. And in Detroit, of course, there's talk of increasing a local tax and getting the state to approve that here in Detroit. So even on a local level, we're facing a lot of challenges, despite the perceptions of strong sales and of course most operators, especially those who are non-corporate operators, local business owners, maybe struggling within because of their margins or the thinning margins that they're dealing with due to, of course, the federal tax issue, and the inconsistencies with legalization, but also the state tax issue. They say it's 24%, but really it's like 40%. And so to protect and grow our industry, and we need to make sure that we're highlighting the economic value. And what we really need to do is have more effective public policy engagement, without sort of downsizing the industry, without increasing taxes, and without, the CRA only, as you know, the CRA only polices licensees. They don't police the black market. And so I think we really need what we're facing right now is a lot of challenges. But just like the casinos or the alcohol industry, or the tobacco industry, they faced a lot of challenges as well. I think the marijuana industry, we're strong, we're resilient, we've been through a lot, and we'll make it through this. But we need to make sure that we have better advocacy on the policy end. And our legislators are actually working with people who know the industry and not people who just want to attack the industry. And then we need to do a better job telling our story of how supportive we are of community priorities. I know in my business, as well as the association, we pump out thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars actually just to community priorities. Neighborhood association groups, nonprofit organizations, we support all of that stuff. And so the industry right now is facing a lot of challenges, but I know we'll make it through it. We need to do a better job making sure that our legislators are giving effective policy and not just taxing us because they think that we're the golden goose that laid the golden egg.
Thank you. Jamie Zerby, you're up next. What do you think is the current state of the industry?
Well, I'm not in the industry, as previously established, but I would say, from our perspective, they're, the people that we work with, again, are parents. We work with people, in every state, specifically Michigan. Like I said, there are a number of parents that we know that have suffered the consequences of this, that have felt this firsthand. Parents who have lost their children, parents whose, children's lives are forever changed as a result of this industry. And I think, while it's not about necessarily attacking an individual or anything like that, it's really about having an understanding that there are two sides to this coin. There is, I'm sure that there are people who use marijuana responsibly, just like there are people who use alcohol responsibly. That doesn't mean that it's inherently good. That doesn't mean that it's inherently helpful, that it's good for communities. There's people who can buy one scratch off a year and are fine, but then there's people who go bankrupt because they buy lottery tickets. So again, there's a very real human impact here to increasing availability of addictive products and addictive industries. And I just don't want that to be forgotten in this broader discussion.
And Jamie Lowell, how would you describe the current state of the industry?
Well, in terms of consumer demand and overall sales, it's strong. But as Al Nathan pointed out, there's a lot of competition and there's a lot of supply, and so that's why prices are low. Um, but I wanted to address the tax and the license limits. There's broader issues with both of those things. Um, if the tax is allowed to stand, not only does it, devastate, already kind of a struggling, scenario or transitioning scenario, but it would make a mockery of the ballot initiative process itself by just bypassing the voters' intent. And likewise, the concept of doing license caps, it's similar to how alcohol works, and there's been a lot of attempts to try to align cannabis with tobacco and alcohol irrationally and not allow it to be what it is with the system that was put in place uh, for it. And there's a lot of us that don't like the concept of making a radical change to what voters approved in an attempt to stabilize the market. And there's no good reason to believe that something like that would even work. And so those are issues. There's other legislation that fits that bill too, that is kind of irrational that we're looking out for and we don't like. But Michigan remains consistently one of the top markets in the U.S. by volume. Uh, the legal market competition is working. We have the low prices, and as Nathan suggested, maybe consolidation was the next phase that we'll be looking at.
That's a good transition to my next and final question, and that is, what do you think is next for the industry in Michigan? And talk about what makes you say that. And Nathan, you're up first again.
Sure thing. I think the factors leading to this consolidation, the cannabis market in Michigan, are unlikely to change anytime soon. And I say this unfortunate because it ultimately hurts small business, as individual and partner-owned businesses tend to get gobbled up by larger corporations. And I think this is kind of similar to the alcohol industry, and in particular beer, where the market was essentially taken over by several large brands. And then sometime later, once that stabilized, a secondary market opened up for artisanal microbrewed products. And I have a lot of hope that we'll see the same sort of phenomenon in the future in cannabis, where once the large corporate markets stabilize on sort of a lowest common denominator, if we will, then space opens up for craft producers again and small business. Of course, if federal legalization ever occurs, that would cause another dramatic shift in the dynamics of the cannabis industry everywhere, in the nation, anyways. And in that case, Michigan's extremely low wholesale prices and attractive farm licensing paradigm would perhaps quickly make us a powerhouse exporter of marijuana products and create a lot of revenue for the state and the people here, as our cannabis industry is well poised to undercut the producers in other states right now, if federal legalization were to occur.
Thank you. Jamie Zerby, what do you think is next?
Well, I will say, and in terms of Michigan specifically, Again, I'm not a market analyst here. I just try to help speak on behalf of some of the parents that have experienced the negative impacts of this and just let other folks know that they're not crazy if they see something happening in their community, if they see negative consequences. And, specifically, we have people on our staff that have suffered from, that are now in recovery from THC. And they, so much have said that they felt that they were crazy. They had friends that really dismissed them that said, oh, you can't be addicted to this. Marijuana's not addictive, all these things. But that's actually not true. Marijuana is very addictive. Some of the SAMHSA data has said that marijuana addiction can be up to 30%. Doesn't mean everybody, of course. Again, there's lots of people who can have one drink, and then there's people who absolutely can't. And I just really, folks just need to be aware that this is not something that is isolated. Use impacts communities, it impacts individuals, it impacts families, and those impacts can be detrimental, and they can even be deadly.
Jamie Lowell, what do you think is next?
Well, I mean, we have those factors that we were talking about, that depending on what happens will shape what comes next. The wholesale tax, if that is allowed to stand, there'll be issues associated with that. If the license caps are seen, if the COD only, if the recriminalizing of uh, minor activity comes around, we'll start seeing a lot of unnecessary changes. If we can get through that and utilize the voter approved act as intended with the local control and with the CRA rulemaking, then I think we'll be in much better shape than if we have to go through some of the backsliding through these policy changes that the legislature is proposing and has enacted, and hopefully that tax gets stopped in the courts because it is unconstitutional.
Al, what do
So,
you think is next for the industry?
So, so next for this industry, as I mentioned, I think is the maturing process, realizing that we are a true commercial industry, similar to the automotive industry, the healthcare industry, the telecom industry, or other commercial retail and logistics industry, etc. And so we will, in that vein and in that evolution, continue to hopefully mature to be able to see what our value is, as well as see what our value is in this industry, as well as, to see how we can take a bigger role in the work that we're doing and how we can engage both with the citizens, organizations, even oppositional organizations, elected officials, and other stakeholders in a more proactive and productive way that's good for our industry. And I want to just make sure that people understand. I didn't get to answer the first question, but the buyer's remorse narrative is emotionally compelling, but analytically sloppy. In Michigan, we're genuinely trying to reverse course, but you see a broad appetite for it, the recriminalization. It's not going to happen, or unwinding the framework that the state has put forward. This industry is here to stay. And we're like a child, unfortunately, a 2-year-old child when it comes to being a business, operating industry, as opposed to like alcohol, tobacco, and everything else. But just like with alcohol, you saw fights against billboards. You remember Denounce the 40 ounce. There are fights against our billboards. There were fights against, where you put liquor stores. The 2 mile rule or the mile rule. You had to have we couldn't have a liquor store within a mile of each other. In some communities, that's happening now with our dispensaries. And so this is a very maturing market. We're still small, we're still short, we're still young, but we'll continue to mature. We'll continue to do more advocacy on the legislative level and work to create better policy that benefits communities, but also benefits our consumers. And then at the end of the day, benefits the owners, the business owners within this industry. And so, as I said, we're a growing market. Michigan is one of the best markets to be in, one of the most competitive markets to be in, but also one of the most profitable markets to be in. And so in Michigan, we're going to continue to grow and have a bigger role in the work that we're doing. so we can engage more with citizens, elected officials, and the stakeholders. That's what DCIA, Detroit Cannabis Industry Association, is doing. That's what we're doing at Secure Can too. We own the cut, and that's what I think more business owners are starting to do as we grow in this state and in this market.
Thank you very much. All right, we're getting down to the last few minutes here. I want to give each of you a chance to very quickly, please, if there's anything else you want to add or any kind of high-level messages you want to get across, and then we'll get to reader questions. Nathan, we'll start with you.
Sure thing. Yeah, I'd just like to, I think it's worth bringing up the so-called intoxicating hemp market. These have kind of flown under the radar in Michigan because we do have such a robust marijuana market. However, what's going on here is that hemp, grown legally under the 2018 Farm Bill, is used to produce marijuana products with THC in them, like vaporizers, candy, and soda, which has a medical or inebriating amount of THC and other cannabinoids in it. And because these are made from hemp, they are legal under the 2018 Farm Bill, and they can be sold at gas stations, convenience stores. They can be sold without any kind of age restriction. Now, Congress has just acted in the federal budget this year to close that loophole by banning THC products produced from hemp. I applaud that effort due to the lack of regulation in that space. But what we've been finding is that these products often contain illegal pesticides, heavy metals, and other known carcinogens, and wildly different medicinal content from what's listed on their labels. The space is largely completely unregulated, and it's really blown up quite quickly. States that do not have legal marijuana, like Montana and Wisconsin, many others, have seen a proliferation of these hemp marijuana products being sold in their gas stations and convenience stores. This summer, I took a trip out to Washington to visit some family members, and we drove. And so I drove through Montana, North Dakota. I drove through South Dakota on the way back. And something like half of the floor space in just about every gas station I went into was filled with these unregulated marijuana products. And they're not tested for safety or potency or anything like that, as I mentioned. And so states without a legal marijuana market have really been struggling with this problem. And I just think it's worth pointing out that in Michigan, these dangerous and unregulated products have been available, but their popularity has been very limited, largely due to our thriving and robust legal marijuana market, which is composed entirely of products that have genuine health and safety testing standards. And so again, I applaud the federal effort to close that loophole. I do hope that better regulation comes out of it. I think prohibition isn't the ultimate answer, but the dangerous and unregulated products have been a problem for states to reconcile with. And again, the main reason that we haven't struggled with them as much here in Michigan is because we do have such a robust marijuana industry.
Jamie Zerby, any last minute thoughts?
Sure. I just want to clarify a couple of things that Nathan said. Montana has legal marijuana. They've had it since 2020. Washington, one of the first states to legalize. So a few of the states that you mentioned, they do have it. I understand your point about that. Hemp has resulted in this big boom for consumer consequences, consumer confusion, all of that. But whether a state has legal marijuana or not legal marijuana, they've still faced the consequences of hemp, of marijuana, because the more readily something is available. We've talked about border cities. The places closer to the border in non-legal states have also faced these consequences. So just wanted to just state that for the record there. We supported the closing of the hemp loophole. That was a really good example of the industry having an inch and taking a mile, and seeing something that they could exploit in the language of the law. And that's really how we see this industry as a whole. I know there's a differentiation between hemp and marijuana, but that's all semantics as far as I'm concerned. The broader industry that profits off of repeat customers, off of addiction, that's really the industry, whether that's tobacco, alcohol, marijuana, hemp, whatever it is, that's an industry that we are very concerned about. And that's something that we just believe that states are just ill-equipped to regulate.
Al, quickly, any last minute thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, again, people, so I truly believe that towns don't, there are cities and towns in the state of Michigan that need the revenue sharing, need the growth. You take Warren, for example, that had a whole bunch of vacant factory buildings that are mostly full now because of the marijuana industry. Flint, that had again business. I mean, there was a whole road leading on Door Highway leading to the freeway where most of the places on Door Highway were vacant and empty. And now they're bustling businesses because of the cannabis industry. You take places like Benton Harbor or even Traverse City that have become destinations, not only for tourism, but also because of the great businesses in the cannabis industry that exist there. And so we've added to the tax rolls for education, we've added to the tax rolls for roads. We've added to the tax rolls when it comes to income taxes. We've made cities more vibrant. We've employed people. This industry is here to stay. And in the state of Michigan, we're always going to have opposition, and I welcome the opposition wholeheartedly. We can talk about how we create a safer space for people to partake in this industry. I would love to have that conversation with people, but at the same time, we need to understand that it's not the business owners who are paying taxes that are operating illegally. It's the black market when it comes to hemp sales and selling illegal cannabis in gas stations and liquor stores. That's not me. Those are people who don't have a license who are trying to get over on the industry. And so, I think that we need to implore the state and the CRA to do a better job locking down black market operators, and at the same time, do a better job making it easier for people who are in business, employing people and paying taxes to actually operate in the state. And we'll come with open arms, open hands, and try to make it safe for everybody in every city that we're operating in, of course. But at the same time, we need to make sure that we're tying down and locking down the black market. The CRA needs to do a better job at doing. And as we move forward with the 24% tax hike, tax increase, I've said to the governor to her face and all of the news, yeah, that's going to put some people out of business. But those who are serious about this are going to stay in business. This industry isn't going anywhere, and they can't continue to think that they can operate and increase taxes on the industry just to pay for roads and to pay for all the other things that they need to pay for. They need to come to us and make sure that we are comfortably helping to operate this state with the taxes that we bear. And so, yeah, I think that we have a big road ahead, but we ain't going nowhere. The industry isn't going nowhere. It's going to continue to be vibrant and continue to move forward and continue to expand. Michigan, and one day soon, will be the number one place for cannabis in the country.
Thank you. Jamie Lowell, quickly, so we have time to get to reader questions. What are your last thoughts?
Yeah, just really quickly again, just want to reiterate, we need to stay away from like major revisions to the act and work within the system that was approved by voters in 2018 a lot more. We haven't really even given that the opportunity uh, that was intended. So I'll keep it to that.
All right, thank you. All right, for the reader questions, I'm just going to pick one of you to answer. We won't go through all of you like we did for the other questions, so we can get through as many of these as we can in the last few minutes here. Barb has a question that I will pose to Jamie Lowell. She says, why can't there be max THC percentage like from the 70s? Can you talk a little bit about that, about why the potency seems to be so much higher than it was before and why we don't limit that?
Well, I don't think it's true. I think the potency itself is a misnomer. THC is one molecule in cannabis that works synergistically with the others, the other components, and the actual like percentage of THC is irrelevant in flower and concentrates. So there's no reason to have a cap on it.
Okay. Um, Before we started today, we gave readers the chance to submit some questions. And Bev submitted an interesting question that I'll pose to Al. Al, Bev is asking about enforcement for impaired driving. She's saying she sees this all the time, and she wonders why we don't see more enforcement for impaired driving. Can you talk a little bit about let me pose the question this way. Does the industry have some responsibility to make sure that kind of stuff doesn't happen? Al, are you there? Or did we lose Al? Nathan, could you take that question maybe?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think that the key issue that we're having is there isn't like a breathalyzer for intoxication to cannabis. If you've used cannabis, the THC and factors we test for can stay in your blood for up to 30 days. So it's not a reliable indicator of like, have you used today? Are you inebriated? So we do like roadside testing kind of stuff, but that's pretty limited in its ability to detect and prosecute. So it looks like Al's back. He might have some thoughts on that question too.
Yeah. Go ahead, Al. What are your
Can-
thoughts about impaired driving and the industry's responsibility?
Yeah, can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, perfect. No, I think that we have a responsibility to make our product safer. Absolutely, that's on us. Just like it's on, um, casinos to make sure that people aren't becoming, in getting in debt through their gambling, or it's on bars and nightclubs to make sure that people aren't driving impaired and getting to accidents after they leave the bar. And so we got to do a better job of making cannabis safer. And I think that we're on the way to doing that. I think that there is a lot of buy-in from a number of associations, MICIA, DCIA, as well as many of the operators in this state. We're all trying to figure out how to make things safer. Does the state have a responsibility as well? Yes, they do. Could the CRA be doing more? Yes, they could. Could the state police be more trained and more prepared to identify impaired drivers? Absolutely, they need to be. And so, but we're a long way from that right now. You can't, you can take a breathalyzer for people with alcohol. We need to better identify the ways to identify impaired drivers when it comes to cannabis. Just like they do in California, they you can't drive and smoke. They have a way of doing that. It's not as easy as I think it should be, but yes, the answer is yes. It's on us. We can do a better job when it comes to making cannabis safer, especially for those who are driving.
I just like to add that there's no good reason to believe that cannabis use and driving is
Mhm.
an issue itself.
Mm. All right, folks. We
Um,
are.
could I could
Go
I
ahead,
just
Jamie. Yep.
there is a lot of reason to believe that. I put some information on why THC impaired driving is an issue. There are mothers that I know personally that have lost their children because of THC intoxicated drivers. People that were extremely intoxicated, clearly intoxicated. Data from Colorado, directly from the state of Colorado, has shown that 1 in 4 road deaths in Colorado, marijuana is implicated in. So I've put the objective peer reviewed primary source data in the chat for anybody who's interested in exploring that, instead of just, making broad claims that are untrue. So if anybody's interested in that, I put that in the chat.
I know you said that this is more of a discussion than a debate, and I won't dignify getting into a debate right now. But if there's interest in a return to this discussion or creating a forum in which we can look over this information that supposedly demonstrates a causal relationship between using cannabis and issues with driving, then we should do that so that we can uncover the truth.
Yeah, I think a good faith debate would be something that would be important on this.
All right, folks. We are all out of time. I want to take a minute to thank each and every one of you panelists for participating today. I think that we all learned a lot and appreciate you all taking your time. Thank you to all of the viewers who stepped on to watch this, and I'll hand this back over to Kathy to sign us off.
Thanks, Justin, and to our guests for this spirited conversation. And thank you to all that joined us and asked questions in the chat and participated. So, Lunch Break will be taking a little holiday hiatus, but we're planning ahead for 2026. It's a major election year here in Michigan, and next year's conversations will focus on the issues that matter most to you as voters, prepare to elect a new governor and state legislature. So you're going to find a recording of this and our other lunch breaks on our YouTube channel. And that's it for now. So remember to subscribe to our newsletters and follow us on our social media channels. And thanks again for joining us. Enjoy the rest of the week and have a wonderful holiday season. Thank you all.